Good evening, everybody, and welcome, and thank you for coming. My name is Alicia Goody, and I'll be the moderator of this evening's piano. We have what we hope to be an interesting and informative panel discussion for you this evening. We have four experienced energy and sustainability coordinators: Kate Hanley from Concord, Jillian Wilson-Martin from Natick, Martha Grover from Melrose, and Kim Pruitt from Arlington. So we're looking forward to an interesting evening. The panel sponsor for this evening is Our Charles Climate Action, which is a group of citizens from Ashland, Medway, Millis, Holliston, and Sherborn, who are active in working to address climate change issues at the state and local levels. We are affiliated with an organization called mass.org. You may have heard of it. It's an umbrella organization which is very active in fighting climate change, and it operates through local groups like ours called NODES, and it provides coordination and resources for the local groups. I'd also like to acknowledge tonight several important local people. Everybody here is important, but people who provided support and helped us along the way here. We have Representative Carolyn Dykema from Holliston. We have Jeff Ritter, who's the town manager, and also John Quillen, who is on the Holliston Select Board. And in Sherborn, we have Neil Kessler, who's chairman of the Conservation Commission, Darrell Beardsley, who's on Board of Health, Michael Lesser from Concom and Energy Committee, Aaron Neutra, who's on planning, and a number of other initiatives. So it's great to have all you folks turn out and support us by listening to what we have to offer tonight. Why are we here? We put together the panel to give voters an opportunity to hear what sustainability and energy coordinators actually do and the impact they can make on a town. When we first came together as a group, we talked about what we could do in terms of reducing our carbon footprint. And we took a look at what other towns were doing around us, and we found that most of them had, the ones that were most effective, had sustainability coordinators. And I said to myself, what does a sustainability coordinator do? Well, that's what you'll hear tonight from these four people who are actually doing the position. But in a nutshell, it's a person whose sole focus is on reducing the amount of unclean energy, basically focusing on increasing reliance on clean energy and renewables, and adopting and fostering the adoption of sustainability practices. They also help to identify grants and funding from sources that will help to mitigate these costs. And I think you'll be pretty impressed with some of the statistics that we hear tonight. Why do we need a sustainability coordinator? I've been asked that, and I actually asked myself that at the beginning as well. We have volunteers, we have energy committees, we have recycling communities, and that's a good question. But we do have volunteers that were effective, and over the past number of years at Sherborn, I know we've gotten over $500,000 in grants through green communities. But the scientists tell us that the situation is growing increasingly urgent. We have about 11 years within which we can get carbon emissions under control, or else we start to descend rapidly into a world that's going to be quickly uninhabitable. And so what we started to look at was the sustainability coordinator's role, and we found that they were having very effective impact on the towns. But what amazed us was it wasn't just an environmental or an energy savings impact, it was also a financial impact. It was very beneficial financial impact. We found that there were significant savings that these coordinators were achieving. And the position that we have proposed, and we proposed it through town meeting articles that will come before the Holliston and the Sherborn town meetings in a few weeks. Sherborn's is in April, Holliston's in May, is for the hiring of a part-time coordinator, and that would be a 20-hour position and a salary of $30,000, the benefits that would come to a total figure of $39,000. And we know that's a big ask, but what we've discovered is the return on that investment would be significant, and our research shows that the return could be anywhere between 4.3 and 8.2 times the coordinator's salary. And the salary number that we have proposed is actually on the low to mid-range level of salaries for this position. Again, it's a part-time position. Should Sherborn vote yes and Halston vote no, or vice versa, the position would still be implemented for whatever town votes yes for the position. So with that, I think we are ready to hear from our panelists, and I would invite them up. Jillian, Ken, Martha, and Kate.
So I'm Martha Grover from the city of Melrose, and I've been in this position since Melrose became a green community in the first round of green communities in 2010. And so with our first round of funding, they were able to set aside some money for this position. So first of all, I wanted to say thank you for having us, Flo, but I'll just jump into it so we can get to the meat of what we're all here for. So the city decided to use some of the green community funds to create this part-time position. And I think that the return on investment, I've been asked to go to different cities and towns to talk about these positions, and I can't think of any other position in city government that has a return on investment like this one does, because not only are we, in 8 years I've brought in over $1 million in grant funds and over $1 million in utility incentives, and at the same time, the work that I'm doing, the projects that I'm overseeing, which are energy efficiency projects in the municipal buildings, streetlight retrofits, and work and upgrades or replacements of our fleet vehicles to more energy efficient options or fuel efficient, have all impacted the bottom line. So I think it was the planning director and the mayor at the time who pushed for the position. The money was there in the grant, but pretty early on, the CFO, our DPW director, our fleet manager caught on to the benefit of having somebody who could devote 100% of their time to applying for grants, managing those grants, getting projects to yes, maneuvering through all the different levels of approval through our board of aldermen. Melrose is a city; it's different. It's run a little bit differently, but and over time, anything that has to do with energy, other people have been able to unload some of that stuff. So energy procurement, supply procurement, I do. Renewable energy projects, we've got solar on every available rooftop. And it's just, I think that you've got the money coming in to fund the projects, but at the same time, you have the savings that these projects, the benefits and the savings that they reap. And, in a town with a very, very tight budget, we just passed our first override for the 27 years on Tuesday. So our budget, we're very much running on the margins. We've been able to level fund or decrease our utility budget for most departments for the last 6 years since we've been doing a lot of these projects. And that's just been huge for our departments and for our city, where every new dollar goes to the schools. It's just been, my colleagues just really appreciate the work that I do and the projects that I've been able to make happen in Melrose. The other thing is that I work very closely as the liaison to our volunteer energy committee. So they have been kind of toiling away doing a lot of audits, but not successfully making any real projects happen. And I understand that that's not the case here, that your energy committee's been pretty effective at getting some stuff done. But they found it's night and day between them working outside of City Hall and the difference of having somebody in City Hall, down the hall from a mayor, in the office with our planning director. I hear about a grant, I say, what do you think? Let's go for it, let's do it. The money comes in, we make it happen. So it's not only been green community funds, but it's been funding for electric vehicle chargers and electric vehicles. It's been funding from the municipal vulnerability preparedness planning and action grants. I just heard about the MENA grants that are out there right now. We've got a project that we're working through from the Mass Clean Energy Center. And all of us, we have kind of the luxury and take that time and burden off of others who are, I mean, our DPW is just putting out fires all day. It just seems they're just busy all the time. The last thing they have time to do is apply for a grant and report on that grant and work through all the components of a grant project. So I think that's one of the things I love about the job is it's just constantly new projects and anything new that comes along. In addition to the municipal projects, I think I started to talk about that, is that with the Energy Commission, we've been able to do major community initiatives around solar, around home energy assessments. We're doing a big roof solar project at the community initiative right now. I think we're going to put solar on at least 6 churches and maybe a YMCA. In the municipal aggregation, where we've gone out and procured electricity on behalf of our residents and businesses, is all something that I've done in concert with our Energy Commission, and we work together very well. And this is a part-time position in Melrose, so it's really leveraging the volunteers, but having somebody in City Hall to do that, I think has been very effective over the years.
Thank you.
Can you guys hear me? Okay, good. My name is Jillian Wilson-Martin, and I'm the Sustainability Coordinator in Natick. And I guess we're maybe going in order of when we started. I started in 2014 is when my position was created. Natick has been a green community, which I think you guys are all familiar with the Green Communities program that the state has, and where you're eligible for funding to support energy efficiency projects. We were one of the founding members of that, and my position was previously done as a third of another person's position. And when I when he retired, they turned his position into 3 different jobs, and I was able to accomplish about 7 times more than what he was in his part-time role in terms of how much income or revenue and savings I was generating for the town. And in terms of what I do in my role, I do a lot of the same things that Martha does. I think you're an energy manager in Melrose. As a sustainability coordinator, I have kind of a broader role in Natick. So I do spend about 50% of my time working on energy efficiency, which is great because it does deliver savings in terms of our building operations and just savings to the utility costs that we have to pay in Natick. But I also spend time working on waste reduction. I receive grants in addition to the ones that Martha mentioned from Mass DEP, their Recycling Dividends Program, their Sustainable Materials Management Program, from the Mass Clean Energy Center, from the Municipal Vulnerability Program, including their New Action Grants Program, from MAPC, and from a variety of other organizations. And I recently calculated my return on investment, including the cumulative energy savings that I've been delivering, and it's about 11 times my salary this year. And it's pretty humbling, and I think that it's not necessarily because I'm this, superstar, though I like to think I do a pretty good job at what I work on. I work very hard. But it's because there's really a lot of opportunity out there if you have someone in your community who can be that liaison for those programs. So I'm working with a couple of other communities on a program with our regional planning agency, and those communities have volunteer committees doing their energy work. And the regional planning agency was kind of hesitant to work with them because they said, we're going to be partnering with you on this. We need to have a real commitment from your community that you're invested in this and you're not just going to be kind of waffling and not really able to commit the time that we need for you to get the buy-in for your community to make this a successful program. And as a result, one of those communities wasn't able to participate, and I had to be kind of the lead on the program as the kind of main community leading it. And I think that goes that rings true also with utility partnerships. So Natick has participated in a number of pilot programs with our utility with Eversource, and I think it's because they have someone that they can call and talk to. So we're participating in an on-site operator training right now that isn't available to other communities. It's not a regular incentive that you can read about, but we're getting a lot of technical support and other incentives from Eversource for them to try something out because they know that they have a resource that can help them get things done and learn along the way. Some other things that I work on, a lot of it does come back to partnering with the utility. So in addition to working with them on our municipal buildings, we've done a pretty big push with businesses in Natick. So we help promote their Mass Save program to businesses, and we were able to get over 100 businesses to do energy audits and to commit to doing weatherization work and lighting work, which was generating quite a bit of savings for those businesses. And they were able to get even higher incentives from the utility than they would have had they done it on their own, had the town not had that partnership. So they were able to reap the benefits of the town's partnership. And I would say that on a day-to-day, I agree with Martha, it's a really fun position to have because every day is different, and what you're doing is you're really working with all the different departments, and you can't really be successful if you're working in a silo as just the sustainability coordinator on your own. It's almost like you're a part of every department's team, and my goal over time has been to have those departments see me as a resource that can help them versus seeing me as kind of a nag that's asking them to do something that they don't want to do. It's really about how I can provide them with extra resources to get their job done. So the last example I'll give you is in Natick we have a water treatment plant. We have our own water utility. So it's a little different than how you operate. But our water department, I hadn't worked with them on many projects, and they had this new water smart software they were launching. And with my help, we were able to really do a much bigger campaign to get the word out about their program. We were able to get funding for them to do a water use report that would tell residents what their usage was versus their neighbors or similar households, and they were really excited about that. And that turned out to be a tool that was really engaging to people, and otherwise people might not have really adopted their platform had it not been for the kind of partnership that we could have.
Yeah. So, my name is Ken Pruitt, and I've been Arlington's energy manager since July 2017. My position was created by the town initially in 2013 as a half-time position, shared with another town of Bedford, 50% in each community. Within 2 years, the town realized that this was really a valuable position and made it full-time in Arlington, which has stayed to the present. In terms of the roles, I think we have many similar roles, but each of us sort of has carved out different niches. So in terms of the work that I do, I would say a big portion of it, maybe not quite 50%, but close to that, are conceiving of, writing grant proposals for, and implementing with other staff and contractors energy efficiency projects in the town buildings, just to reduce energy. I think next in order of priority are renewable energy projects. We have at this point solar panels on 6 of our schools, and we're looking at every other possible location we can put solar panels, including parking canopies at some of our larger municipal lots. And just our solar program alone, just on those 6 buildings, is generating $60,000 a year of net profit for the town. So we're generating all of electricity, but in addition to that, there's a $60,000 a year premium to the town. I also work to help the town acquire electric vehicles and also electric vehicle charging stations for those vehicles. We're trying to convert the fleet as quickly as possible to lower carbon sources. I think the initial purpose for my position was as sort of a coordinator for the Green Communities program. It was 3 years after the state's Green Communities designation was bestowed on Arlington. And so both Holliston and Sherborn are also green communities. There's some work that needs to be done every year just to maintain that designation. And then if you do, you're eligible to apply for competitive grants for up to $250,000 per year. And so speaking of which, since 2013, the town of Arlington has been able to win grants over $200,000, on average, over $200,000 a year for each of those years. So at this point, that's over $1 million just since 2013. In addition to that, the energy savings projects, the energy efficiency projects that first my predecessors and now I have done, cumulatively at this point are saving the town $400,000 a year. So when you look at that together, my position, and not necessarily me personally, because I've only been in the position for a year and a half, it generates $6 of benefit to the town for every $1 in annual salary that is paid. Some of the other roles that I play are monitoring energy use in town. We have a very helpful online monitoring tool. And I sort of keep an eye out for anomalies and periodically see some really big ones, and we find out that there's something going wrong in a building, or there's some kind of billing error from either Eversource or our electricity supplier, and we then can correct that. I sit on a number of committees. I chair the town's Clean Energy Future Committee, which was created last year to lead a campaign to make Arlington carbon neutral by 2050. I also chair the town's energy working group, which focuses just on town buildings and the town fleet. Right now, I'm the municipal lead for the Heat Smart program. It's a campaign to convince town residents and businesses to convert to clean heating and cooling technologies. And the list goes on. I think it's similar for all of us. We end up sort of as jacks of all trades, Jacks and Jills of all trades. And I wanted to address this question that has come up a few times about whether or not this kind of position is needed if you have an active committee or volunteers working on these issues in the town. And I think it's great to have those volunteers. There's certainly a large number of them in Arlington, but there is always more work to do, always more savings to be had. In my calculation, just based on the amount of work that I'd like to be able to do on energy efficiency and renewables alone, projects that would save the town money or generate money, there could be 3 of me full-time. I could have an additional 2 people working 40 hours a week as I do, and we still wouldn't exhaust all the projects that we could do in a given year and the grants that we could write proposals for, and the energy efficiency, the renewable energy installations that we could do around town. So we have great volunteers in Arlington as well, but the addition of a full-time person to augment those volunteers has been of tremendous benefit. And someone used the word leverage. There's something to be said for having a person who's dedicated to working on energy efficiency and renewables and sustainability on a regular basis. You develop a level of expertise, you develop relationships with grant makers, with the utilities, with contractors who do this kind of work. You essentially learn how to get things done more and more efficiently over time, and you build a network of colleagues that you can depend on. I work with these colleagues of mine from other towns on a regular basis. I ask their advice, they ask my advice, probably not as often, and it makes us better at what we do, so that when we do have volunteers on committees that we're working with, we can help them to be more effective, because we just have the expertise. We're doing it day in and day out. And that, I think, is is very important. I also want to say that this is one of the best jobs I've ever had. I'm excited to get to work every day, and not because it's relaxing. It's actually pretty stressful a lot of the time, but it's what I care about working on. It's important to me to be doing work that's meaningful, where I feel like I'm making a difference. There is no more important issue in my mind than climate change at this point. But I wouldn't lead with that for why I think your two communities should adopt, should hire either sustainability coordinators or energy managers, or whatever title you want to use. Just forget about all that and look at the money. If you don't hire people to do this kind of work, you are leaving money on the table. Even a moderately effective person in this position, because they're putting their time into it and developing expertise, can raise and save more money than their salary, I think, pretty quickly. And then again, every year those energy savings become cumulative, because those lights, the new HVAC system, are in place in that building going forward year after year, and you simply can get more done with a dedicated person doing the work. Thank you.
Well, this is a tough group to follow. As Ken said, we all know each other actually quite well, even though I'm the newest of the group. My name's Kate Hanley. I'm the Sustainability Director for the town of Concord, and I've been in my role about a year and 4 months, so just shy of Ken's time. And my position has a similar origin story to hopefully what your future sustainability coordinator's story will be. My role was created through Concord's town meeting in 2017, and it was a citizen petition article that asked the town to commit to not only hiring a sustainability director, but committing the town to a greenhouse gas reduction goal of 80% by 2050, which is the Paris Climate Accord goal and also the Massachusetts Global Warming Solutions Act, which now we know may not even be enough, 80%. So it sounds big and it's ambitious, but it's what the town decided that they needed to do their part. And so the article included my position with that goal, also a goal of the town achieving 100% carbon-free electricity by 2030. We have a municipal light plant, so we're unique in that we have more control over our electricity supply. And Concord has a long history of sustainability, which probably will not surprise you. And they've done a lot, but the reason that they decided they needed a sustainability director was for many of the reasons that you heard here, that there's a lot that was done, there are a lot of volunteers, but having someone dedicated solely to looking at sustainability and achieving those greenhouse gas reduction goals was something that they saw was really important to achieving the goals. So I came on board in November of 2017, a few months after that, and I report to the deputy town manager. So I sit within the town manager's office, which I think is really important to being successful in my role, because I have a lot of autonomy. I'm not within a particular department, so I can go to any department I want, more or less, and work collaboratively with them. So that's been one of my goals in getting started, is really positioning myself, much like Jillian said, as a resource to other town departments to figure out what are grants and projects that we can work on together. So a lot of the town departments that I work most closely with are Public Works. There's obviously a lot of overlap there. My role is very broadly focused on sustainability with our greenhouse gas reduction goals, and also climate resilience, so being prepared for the impacts of climate change that we're already going to see. So obviously that overlaps with a lot of town departments and regionally as well. So I work a lot with our Public Works department, our municipal light plant, our water and sewer department. We also have our own water department, and most recently closely with the schools, which I see as a huge opportunity because those are our youngest residents. A lot of our students are really excited about sustainability and energy, and it's a really great opportunity to not only lead by example in reducing our municipal emissions, but also engage a lot of the kids in town, which is also probably one of the really fun parts of my job. We also have committee members and a lot of volunteers who work on sustainability. We have one committee, the Comprehensive Sustainability and Energy Committee, that's been around for almost 10 years now. And they started doing a lot of municipal energy projects under the green communities when there wasn't a staff person dedicated to it. Their charge has evolved over the years, and now they focus a lot on community engagement. So they realize that, the municipal portion of our community emissions is a very small portion. It's probably less than 5%. But a lot of our emissions in town come from residents, from homes. And so they have focused a lot of their efforts on engaging citizens and their fellow residents on how do we reduce emissions from the way that we heat and cool our homes and get around town. So they did a campaign around solar, rooftop solar. We now have over 300 homes in Concord that have rooftop solar, much thanks to their efforts there. They also ran the Heat Smart campaign that Ken mentioned last year, promoting heat pumps in town, and have done a whole number of other things. We have another sustainability committee that's called the Climate Action Advisory Board, and they were formed also in response to the town meeting vote that created my position. And the reason for that was that they said, if we have these big greenhouse gas reduction goals, we need, a group of people in town who have expertise in climate change to advise me and the town on how to achieve those goals. So they were formed in October of this past year, so they're still getting started. But their first task is to advise me and the town on developing a climate action plan. And that's really important because we have our goals, we now have our baseline, we need to connect the dots. How do we achieve our goals from where we are today? So they're going to be really helpful in that. A lot of the other things I do are focusing on engaging all of our partners in town. So I work with a lot of community groups, not just ones focused on sustainability, but especially ones that aren't, because there are 16,000 people in Concord and I'm one person. So it's hard for me to talk to everyone in town, but if I can talk to groups that have their own connections and their networks and work through those networks, we can reach a lot more people. So for example, I just in the last month spoke to League of Women Voters, one of the churches in town, and the Concord Business Partnership. And then there's a lot of regional groups that a lot of us are part of that provide great resources and networking. And so, I would say that, having a sustainability person, certainly you can make the business case for that. There's, as all of them said, that there's clearly energy savings to be had. And, also thinking about grants, I spent a lot of my time working on grants. In my first year on the job, I applied for grants and received almost $200,000. This year already, I've applied for over $500,000, and it's only April. And I know that there's another probably $800,000 that I'll apply for in the next couple weeks, and then we'll only be halfway through the year. So there are a lot of grant opportunities that are available. That's not to toot my own horn. There's just a lot out there. And, not to say that the town wouldn't necessarily have applied for some of those without me, but a lot of the grant opportunities really do come up sometimes unexpectedly. They have short timelines to get in an application. So having someone there who works with all the town departments, like Martha said, I can just go down the hall and say, hey, there's this grant. I think we should apply for it. Do you have a project that's shovel ready that we can apply for? And being able to identify those and get those in really makes a big difference. And I think that could be very challenging for volunteers to do, just because you have other things going on, right? This is my sole focus, 40 hours a week at minimum. So having that dedicated time to do it. So there's definitely, I think, the financial case to be made. But I would also say that there's the values is also in the values of your towns. And if you think that addressing climate change and sustainability is important, then dedicating the resources to do that, I think, is something that is also equally valuable. So I'll stop there and happy to answer questions.
Thank you.
You have an opportunity now to ask your questions, if you have a concern, if you have an issue you want to talk about. Please, we'll do this kind of like we do a town meeting. We'll put the mic here and line up and ask your questions. This is our opportunity to really understand what they do and get your questions answered if you have a wonder what it's really all about. So please, take the microphone and we'll go from there.
Right, thank you for your presentation. It's very well done, very interesting.
I'd like to know what your training was when you came to the job and why you're doing that. What's your field, where you came from? Are you part of the community? Do you live in your town? And that sort of thing. So tell us more about that. Thanks.
I'm happy to go first. So I think like a lot of people, my career has had various chapters. I've always been essentially working in the environmental field, if you can call it that. It's so broad, it's almost ridiculous to say that there is an environmental field. But I got a master's degree in forest science from the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies. My first job was working for a consulting firm in the Washington, D.C. area as a contractor for the EPA and the Department of Energy, working on actually a greenhouse gas forestry project related to greenhouse gas reduction, and then a land use project in the Chesapeake Bay. Moved back to Massachusetts, where I grew up, and worked for 5 years as a conservation administrator for the town of Oxford. And then I became executive director of the Mass Association of Conservation Commissions for 5 years. Then I joined the Environmental League of Massachusetts in Boston, where I was managing director for 6 years, and then executive director for 3 years, and then came to the town of Arlington about a year and a half ago. And so I had quite a bit of experience with environmental policy for the previous 9 years at the Environmental League, including climate and energy policy, but really that's at the state level. You know, I was a registered lobbyist, and our organization, you know, pushed for bills in the State House. I really had very little direct experience with, you know, HVAC systems, with the state's Green Communities program from the standpoint of applying for grants, with greenhouse gas inventories and the rest of it. And you know, I made the case in my interview that I had some other attributes that would be helpful. I've written many grants, fundraising for nonprofits. I've managed, you know, hundreds, if not thousands, of projects. I have some modicum of interpersonal skills, and I made the case that I could, you know, learn what a rooftop unit was, and you know, how solar hot water worked, and how a solar power purchase agreement worked fairly quickly, and those other skills would be there, you know, all throughout. And so, you know, the learning curve has been incredibly steep for me. It's getting a little flatter at this point. But in fact, it turned out that what I said in my interview turned out to mostly be true. I've been writing a lot of grants and mostly winning, because that's an important skill. I'm a decent writer. You know, having interpersonal skills is helpful. You're mostly asking for other town departments and committees and residents and businesses to do things with you. You can't really tell them to do anything in a position like ours. And so being able to persuade people and speak plain English is very helpful. Someone with a straight engineering degree who, you know, not to pick on engineers, my daughter's about to go to college to become an engineer, but you know, you have to, the skill set isn't necessarily what you think it would be for someone who's going into energy efficiency and renewables. And so there's a wider skill set when you're a municipal employee. I live in the town of Winchester, right next door to Arlington, but I'm heavily involved in both communities and have been for quite a while. So when this position opened up in Arlington, I immediately jumped at it.
So my path to this position is a little bit different. I think if I applied today as the person I was 8 years ago, I doubt I would get hired, because there are a lot of programs now, a lot of people coming out of sustainability programs and environmental and planning programs with a lot more skills than I had 8 years ago. I actually have a master's in public health. I was a healthcare administrator for 10 years, and was home for 8 years with raising three kids, and was looking to do something part-time, and I ran into the mayor at the coffee shop. I live in Melrose, so I, you know, started putting the word out that I was looking for something part-time to do, in town. I didn't want to have to commute anywhere. And he said, oh, we just became a green community. There's this job. I said, well, I don't know anything about energy. He said, yeah, but you get things done. Because I had already been very involved in the community, served on a lot of boards and done a lot of projects in town. So I was a known quantity as somebody who just could get things done and work with a variety of people. So applied for it, and again, especially in the first few years, relied heavily on our energy commission, who are the professionals, who are the building. A lot of them were retired building professionals or engineers, architects, etc. So turned to them, turned to consultants, and learned a lot. Every project was something is something new. I learn it, figure it out, make it happen, and rely again on colleagues. And we have a great group of people. I just really enjoy getting together with them and hearing about what they're working on and getting ideas and getting their RFPs and other documents that I can cut and paste. And recently, you know, in Melrose, we've done a lot of the big projects, and we've picked all the low-hanging fruit. And one of the smartest things we did after installing a lot of very complicated energy management systems in our buildings and new HVAC systems through all these projects that I've done. I don't have those skills to manage them and to do the day-to-day facility management. That's not my skill set. So a couple of years ago, they hired an HVAC specialist, somebody who's in-house. So we saved a lot of money also with that hire. We didn't have to depend on all these consultants that we were bringing in to manage our buildings. So I depend very much on him. So the two of us, Mark and I, he's work very closely together. He's kind of the technical person, and I'm the grant manager, project manager, scheduler, coordinator, and all of that. But that's my background. Again, I looked at my resume recently because I was pulling it out for another grant application. I said to my boss, I have no idea why you hired me. There's nothing in this that indicates that I could do this job, but I've learned on the job. And I think if you can manage projects and just, like I said, work with a variety of people and collaborate and seek help when you need it, I think that's how you get it done.
Yeah, I would agree. So I kind of had a similar situation when I applied for the job in Natick, which was that the job description didn't really match, or the skill set they had listed in the background didn't really match what my background was. So my background is that I have an undergrad in economics. I spent a few years working at an economic consulting firm. I found out that I really like data and crunching numbers, but I also really like people, and I was tired of staring at a computer screen, and I wanted to be a little more creative. So I worked for, I spent about 10 years in consulting, working for a company that focused on corporate social responsibility and sustainability consulting. And that sounds really wonky, and it kind of is, but some of my big clients, it was mostly with Fortune 500 companies. I spent a good deal of time working with Hilton Worldwide, developing their strategy for their entire corporation down to what would happen at the hotel and how they would manage the energy efficiency of their buildings, but also how they would manage employees giving back and all sorts of different things. And I was ready for a career that didn't require as much travel, having started a young family. And I happened to see this job posting in my town where I live, and it seemed like something really fun to try to be like the hotel that I had been advising at the corporate level and really be working on the ground. I would say that the job, and what their job description said was they wanted someone who was an environmental science major and things like that. And I would say that's really not what you need for this position, because if you listen to what I described, the different projects I work on, they're so varied that there's no way that you would be successful if you hired someone who is an expert in just one of those areas. So the key skills that I think you need in a sustainability coordinator are project management, communications, salesmanship, and agility and curiosity, because every day I'm learning something different and I need to quickly master that, kind of like when I was a consultant where I needed to be smart enough to convince my client that I could tell them what to do, and then I would read a book and figure it out and then give them the answer that they didn't have because they didn't have the time to do it. So I think that you really just need someone who can be effective at communicating, and project management is really pretty key.
So my career path is a lot shorter and has been entirely focused on sustainability. So I do have a degree in environmental science, but also an MBA. So I did a dual degree grad program at Clark University in Worcester, an MBA and a master's in environmental science, because I wanted to bring those two things together to focus on sustainability. And then from there, I spent about 5.5 years working for Environmental Defense Fund, EDF, in Boston. And EDF is a large environmental nonprofit, but I focus on a program called EDF Climate Corps, which is basically a large-scale internship program for grad students to work on energy and sustainability projects in companies like Hilton was one that we worked on all over the country and in China. So I spent a lot of time over those years talking to and working with a lot of companies and cities and organizations on the sustainability challenges and projects that they were focusing on. So I felt like I had this really bird's eye level view of what does it take to do sustainability and what does that look like. And it is very varied and very broad. It involves a lot of different skill sets. But I was to the point where I really wanted to get my hands dirty and actually do some of the sustainability work myself, which is why when I saw the job in Concord, I thought, well, that's perfect because I'm from Massachusetts. This is a town that's made this big commitment. And I had seen a lot of companies and talked to a lot of sustainability and companies who they really struggled because they didn't have autonomy, they didn't have a budget, they didn't have a clear goal, or they, had one of those but not the others. And I thought Concord really did it right by setting up a goal, giving this person some autonomy and a clear charge for what they were going to do. So I figured I'd throw my hat in the ring, and apparently there were almost 200 applicants for my job, so I feel very, very lucky and to have made the cut. And that's just to show you that there are a lot of people who really want a career in sustainability, and like me, this has been their entire focus, and that's because it's something that I really care about, and I think it's one of the biggest challenges of our times. And it's also really interesting and fun. I say all the time that this job is definitely not boring. There's always something new to do, and I think that all the skills that they mentioned are really important, and finding someone who can say, you know what, I don't know the answer to that, but I'm going to figure it out.
Hi. Just wanted to say thank you for all your hard work. It's amazing just to hear about it. But I had a question for you. Here in Sherborn, one of the sort of downsides of climate change is how much sort of storm damage there is. We've got a lot of trees dying. There's issues around flooding and stormwater management at the town level. And I'm just wondering, just as part of your role there, do you seek grant funding for things of that sort that isn't just sort of necessarily improvements, but also things that help to, fund tree management and things of that sort?
Yes. So I think Martha mentioned the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, also known as MVP. It's a fairly new program that's a state grant program. It's a top priority of the governor, so it's one that I think will be well funded going forward, which is great. Basically, you go through the first step as a community doing a planning grant, which I think you may have already done. And as a community, you look at what are your top climate risks. So what are you most vulnerable to? So we did this in Concord, and our four are drought, flooding, extreme storms, and extreme heat. And then once you finish that process, you're eligible for these action grants, which the last round, each community could apply for up to $400,000. This round that is out right now, you can apply for up to $2 million per community. It's to do things exactly like that, to help make your community more resilient to the impacts that you're already seeing. So one of the things we're actually talking about in Concord is a tree project to look at our urban shade trees that will help, make sure that we have healthy trees that are protecting us from extreme heat and also more resilient to things like, extreme wind and storms that, we have seen more trees downed in extreme storms, especially last winter.
I would just add there's quite a bit of funding out there right now for stormwater, especially under the new stormwater permit. And in Native, we are applying for federal funding. There's a program called 604B that we're applying for that's around improving local water quality, and it ties to stormwater. We are a recipient of an action grant last year. I know it was $2 million this year, so I have to look into that a little bit more. But one of our action grants was focused on trees and developing a tree planting plan focused on heat islands and reducing stormwater runoff. So I think there's a lot of resources out there to support the resiliency side of things. So I think having a coordinator who can manage that and stay on top of all the opportunities is really helpful.
I forgot to mention that that's another part of what I've been doing, and my job is, my title is Energy Efficiency Manager, but because anything that's related to climate sustainability just gets, so I also serve on the Metro Mayor's Climate Preparedness Task Force. I represent Melrose on this 15 community task force that's Boston, some of Cambridge, and then the surrounding cities. And with that, we do, we've been talking about some regional projects to prepare for and to adapt to climate change and the impacts there. And I found myself, especially in the last year or so, working closely with our engineering department on, as these grant opportunities come up, talking about the stormwater issues that we have and accessing funding to dredge some of our culverts and some of the other things that came up in our action items and our priorities. So that definitely is something that I think I'm morphing more into now a sustainability coordinator type position because of all the variety of things that I've been working on.
Just take your questions.
Yeah.
Hey there. My question is directed to the woman from Concord. I didn't get your name, sorry about that. But you mentioned that in October of 2018, Concord created a Climate Action Advisory Board, and their mission is to create a climate action plan. Can you talk a little bit, are you able to talk a little bit about the elements of the climate action plan for us?
Sure, yeah, so my name's Kate. Great question. So the Climate Action Advisory Board, their charge is broadly to advise me and the town on how do we achieve our climate goals. So when we talk about climate goals, we talk about both mitigation, which is reducing our greenhouse gas emissions and our contribution to climate change, but also adaptation. And how do we be more prepared and adapt to the impacts that we're already seeing? So what we've been talking about, and we're in the very, very early stages of just talking about what we should go into a climate action plan. We are by far not the first community to do a climate action plan, but our goals are to develop what we're calling an integrated climate action plan. So looking at both the mitigation side, how do we reduce our emissions, and the adaptation side, how do we be more prepared for what we're already seeing and what there's going to be more of. So this will include things like looking at our energy use, right? We are talking about electrification of transportation and home heating and cooling, making sure that our electricity supply is carbon-free or renewable. And so, there'll be specific strategies within those. So Ken mentioned Heat Smart that we participated in. Heat pumps is one very specific strategy to electrify the heating and cooling of homes. So, there are a lot of best practices out there that we'll be able to draw on from other communities as far as mitigation and then also adaptation. So looking at things like our stormwater management, and a lot of these things are in other town plans already. We just finished a long-range plan, we have a hazard mitigation plan. There's a lot that's already in place, but what the climate action plan can do is pull all of that together and show how it relates to taking action on climate. And I'd be happy to follow up later with some example plans that I've been looking at.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to come and listen to you all. I'm Pete Dunbeck from Westboro. I'm Sustainable Westboro Care. So we're anticipating potentially doing some of this with town meeting points and sustainability coordinators and so forth. So, questions, in your introductory comments, only one of you mentioned schools. Do you all cover both the town buildings and the schools? So it's not like, because clearly the biggest footprint in our town is the school buildings themselves. Second thing was the ROI. You mentioned in some cases the benefits to residents, like the solar programs and so forth. Is your ROI inclusive of the financial benefit to the residents, or is it just the direct municipal budget benefit? Just so that I'm quoting it correctly when I go back home. Quote your great numbers.
I just included the benefit to the municipality in my ROI calculations.
Yeah, I did the same. I wonder what the number would be if we all included the benefits to residents, because it's obviously over a much broader number of buildings and families. Thanks for the idea.
Hi there, I'm from Holliston. I have a question, I think maybe more related to greenhouse gas emissions, and I'm wondering if you have any initiatives or efforts related to transportation, and by that I mean more passenger vehicles than the fleets that you mentioned before. And then my second question is public health, again related to greenhouse emissions, whether or not you address public health concerns with greenhouse emissions in your communities.
I can start by saying that some of the projects that we're working on that are transportation related are focused on smart growth and how we can better cluster our development in Natick to be closer to our commuter rail stations and public transit. I'm also working on a project with Boston University with students through their SPARK program on analyzing our school bus and public bus system and how there could be opportunities for overlap and how we can increase school bus ridership in Natick, because one thing people in Natick always complain about is traffic, and I've noticed there's quite a bit of traffic during school drop-off and pickup times beyond just the greenhouse gas emissions. So those are a couple projects beyond just electrifying our own municipal fleet. And then in terms of public health, I find that energy reduction is a big public health benefit anyway. Another project that I work on is our electricity aggregation, which I know some other folks here work on that as well. And on Monday night, after some time, our selectmen approved increasing the renewable content of our electricity aggregation from 5% more than what the state requires to 10% more than what the state requires. So it'll be almost 25% more class 1 renewable energy content, and where Natick's electricity comes from. And that means that in our region, we'll be relying less on fossil fuels and more on renewable energy, which creates an important public health benefit. So, and I'm not reporting directly to the health department. There are other projects that, from a sustainability perspective, I've worked on. I've worked on a program with the Toxic Use Reduction Institute on piloting organic lawn care practices on public property. And really, the list could go on and on. There's a variety of projects that we work on, but I think there's a close tie to public health for sure.
We've also been working on electric vehicles in Concord. So we have, as I mentioned, a municipal light plant. So part of their strategic plan is encouraging more electric vehicles, which makes very good sense for them. But it's also something that, from a sustainability perspective, we see as an important part of achieving our greenhouse gas reduction goals. So raising the awareness of the options of electric vehicles, how do you charge them, providing incentives for charging off-peak at night, which is better for our electricity grid. And we also have been working on decarbonizing our electricity supply so that you can really say when you drive electric, it's really emissions free, when your electricity is also emissions free. And then from the public health perspective, one of the examples that's coming to mind is we have one electric school bus that we received through a grant program. That was a pilot. Amherst and Cambridge also got one. And we just applied for funding for one more electric school bus. And I think that's a really good example of the connection between sustainability and climate resilience and public health, because these are your kids getting on a bus that is now not emitting any pollutants, right? When it's electric, it also has the potential to serve as battery storage in the case of storms. So there's a lot of good opportunities with something like an electric bus. But I think that's a great question because there are so many co-benefits to sustainability projects. Public health being a really big one that we probably don't talk about enough when we're talking about some of these sustainability projects.
The only thing I would sort of add that's unique, all good points, and we're doing, similar things in Arlington, is that, we're also looking at trying to get people out of any vehicle, bike paths, more friendly pedestrian corridors. We're expanding the Complete Streets program. So in addition to trying to electrify our transportation system, electric school buses, EVs, and so on and so forth, how can we actually get people out moving their bodies to move around, either on a bicycle or on foot? And so we're taking a look at how to make sure that streets aren't just for vehicles.
Hi, I'm from Sherborn. I have a question, but I actually do want to speak to one thing because there's not many people from Sherborn here. I am a person who was part of the Energy Committee. I was part of the Energy Committee from the very beginning in Sherborn. I actually kind of want to make a pitch so that it's I don't know how much more meeting time there'll be before town meeting. I was on the committee from the very beginning, and I'm the one who sat around and spent hours helping put all the light bulbs in all the schools and basically doing what it took to get a grant for green communities of $140,000 and then how to spend it and do it. It's a task that we do need some support for. Doing it as a volunteer was extremely somewhat demanding. I have a background in it to some extent, but I would say that it really, as they've spoken, there is a tremendous amount of leverage to be gained from having somebody on staff who does a town plan, who does some of that help. It's a date, but it would make a big difference in terms of things that have not happened since I was decided I hadn't had much time to pursue some of these projects. There have been grants that have been missed. There's opportunities that we could have followed up on. And so therefore I think that they're even for a small town, my question is going to be, we're a very small town, unlike what they have in one of the towns. And I think that even for a small town, there's a lot of benefits and grants that we still have. So I can talk about it another time. We're talking to a town meeting about it, having lived it for years. But I'll come around to you guys and say, as a small town in Sherborn, I'm wondering whether your bigger towns of the Concord's a little closer. Have you ever are there really opportunities for you to team up with other towns that are neighboring, and to what extent is that the kind of thing where you get a little more leverage that way in terms of doing proposals with others that might help, or whether things are really very town-centered, or whether there's some benefits to be had that way with somebody who can work in other towns. And another second question would be whether you guys have done any work on sort of waste minimization, kind of whether there's grants and projects for waste minimization kind of stuff.
I can speak to the working with other towns. I don't cover waste yet. I haven't added that to my job responsibilities. But as an example, Arlington, Melrose, and Natick are working together through a grant through the MEPC, our regional planning agency, to do some net zero planning together. So it's a 2-year process that we just launched a few weeks ago. So that's one example of the three of us working together, learning from each other as we go along, leveraging this funding and the resources of our regional planning agency together to launch this net zero planning, which we're all really excited about. But I work closely with our neighbors, especially on a number of things, and there are different models where there are some cities and towns who share energy managers, but also there's one consultant who works for, I think she's now up to 6 different towns that she does projects in. So there are a lot of different ways to approach sharing, but we, in a lot of different ways, big and small, we do work together, and it's to everyone's benefit when we do.
Yeah, one example in Concord is when we did the Heat Smart grant program last year, we partnered up with Carlisle, who's our neighbor. And I was at a meeting of the Magic area, which is 13 towns in the Concord region, and a lot of talk about partnership, especially when it comes to transportation, because that is, you know, so much broader than just your own town. So there's definitely a lot of good examples of partnerships.
The other thing I would add is that just as having professional staff in a town who write grant proposals and keep writing them and get better and better at it, and have go-to text that they know where to find it, and they have relationships with grant makers. One thing that grant makers really like are collaborations. If two or more municipalities go in together for a grant proposal, it's much more likely to get funded than one community doing it by themselves. It's true for almost all grant makers. They want to see collaboration. They don't want everyone siloed. So the more you can partner that way, you're gonna win more money for more projects.
One other thing I realized, another big thing that I didn't mention is the procurement piece, procuring contractors and projects. So especially in the early years, where I didn't really know what I was doing, did regional procurements with 5 cities and towns, or there's one big solar one, 17 of us, or the ESCO project, there were 14 of us. And it's just great because you attract the attention. I think Sherborn actually took part in one of them, possibly. But you attract the attention of, Melrose, if I had just gone out on my own to procure a streetlight contract, LED streetlight contractor, or a solar developer, I probably wouldn't have gotten the same level of attention or same level of expertise and pricing, etc., than if I had done it on my own. So that's another great way that we work together, is through procurement.
I think you also asked about waste. I also don't. Our waste and recycling is managed by our public works, but I do connect with the person there who manages that. A lot of the stuff that they do is around, obviously, recycling. We have a compost site where we have yard waste that you can drop off. There's a committee that does drop-off, swap-off days that focus on reuse. But one of the topics that's come up a lot in town is composting as a way to reduce our organic waste in our trash. And so I think that's probably going to be something that we focus more on in the coming years, and I think that's coming up in a lot of communities, is how do we do a better job of composting and getting organic waste out of the trash.
And in my role in Natick, I do a lot of waste reduction work, and we're a pay-as-you-throw community, and I help support that with the DPW being the lead. I've worked on bringing new programs like curbside composting, like curbside textile recycling, and now a new drop-off program for composting, and the list could go on, but I'd be happy to talk to you in more detail about that after as well.
I have a question about community choice aggregation. I think a few of you mentioned that you've done some kind of aggregation with electricity purchasing. Could you explain a little bit about how you've got that going in your town? I come from Weston, much smaller town, and we're actually looking at some different initiatives, and I think this is one that could engage the community more, because I think a lot of the municipal activities around energy efficiency are being done through the green communities grants that we've got, but engaging more around the community and how to use energy more efficiently, I think could come through a community choice initiative.
Yes, so Melrose did a municipal aggregation program, started it back in 2015, and the process is that first year town, for us, the Board of Aldermen had to approve us pursuing the concept of aggregation. And municipal aggregation, for those of you who don't know, is where the city arranges for the electricity supply on behalf of residents and small businesses in your town. So it doesn't replace the utility. It's just the supply, the electricity portion of what you're purchasing. And it's a great way through this aggregation that you can increase the amount of renewable energy. And we purchase an additional 5% on top of the required RPS. So it works in communities where you have a utility, National Grid or Eversource. So you have to. It's laid out in the statute. But I guess backing up from that, one of the first things I would suggest for a small town is to procure a consultant to help you work through the process. And you have to get approvals through your board or your alderman, selectmen, and then you write a plan and submit it to DPU. They approve it, and then you launch your program. And it kind of takes off from there. But we can talk to you further about it afterwards as well.
Yeah, I would just add that that could be another benefit of having a sustainability coordinator to manage that kind of consultant team. The consultants typically will do the work without pay until the aggregation comes to fruition, and then they make a small. The way that they are paid is based on the rate and the electricity that's used by your customers in town. And in Natick, we're using, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be in our next contract procuring 10% as more than what the state requires for renewable energy content as our default option. So what a resident or business would automatically be put into. And I do agree there is a great opportunity for engaging the public on supporting greater percentages of renewable in the content of their electricity. It is a complex issue and it is difficult to explain to residents. So, like Martha mentioned, I'd be happy to talk to you more about some of the details of the program.
Concord has a municipal light plant, so it doesn't really apply to us, but Lexington has done it, and they may be a good resource for you because I think they did it fairly recently, and it's very, very high percentage renewable.
I first want to thank you so much for coming tonight, and also to thank you so much for doing such an important job in trying to reduce our carbon footprint and also save your town money. You mentioned a little about schools, and this man over here mentioned about school. Being a retired teacher, I would be interested in knowing specifically some programs that you have implemented in the schools working with the students. Thank you.
It's a great question, and we're really just getting started. We have a superintendent who is basically as new as me, so we've just assembled a school sustainability committee a couple months ago. So we're just in the process of setting goals for the school system to make sure they align with the towns, and identifying, what's already happening in the schools, and there is a lot happening in the schools. So one example is one of the elementary schools is doing composting once a week. So there's a group of parents who are coming and helping the students learn how to separate and compost. So, one of the things that we're hoping to do by having this committee is to find examples of things that are happening kind of one-off in the schools, figure out what works, and make sure that we're deploying that more broadly across the school. So that's one example, but I know there are many more.
So we're lucky enough to actually have a school sustainability coordinator. She's part-time and she's worked to create green teams in each school. It's mostly students, but often teachers get involved as well. And they work on a variety of projects, and they often invite people, including myself, to come in and speak on different topics. But in certain schools, they have worked to set up composting programs, which is often mostly a behavioral change issue, where they sort of use peer pressure to get their fellow students to not throw their food in the trash, but instead scrape it into the composting bin, and work on other issues around recycling. When I go to the schools, I take them on tours of the boiler room, which they love for some reason, and explain where heat and air conditioning comes from. But you don't have to have a sustainability, school sustainability coordinator. You can, just get involved with the teachers. In fact, if we didn't have one, I'd probably, be doing more in that area myself. But it's kind of, we're blessed to have that additional position.
First of all, thank you all. This has been a great presentation and very thought-provoking. I wasn't going to ask my hardball question because I'm a visitor from Ashland. I think I've been told that we have a 100% aggregation program, which is just great if it's true. I need to get more details. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, UN grouping of every country in the world pretty much, said that we have to reduce our carbon footprint by 45% within the 11 years that the initial speaker referred to. 45%. So a two-part question. The same question, two parts. The first part is, do you believe that the efforts that we're making in your current position and the support you do or don't receive from, the town administration or the residents will enable you to reach that kind of target? Is that something you even measure? The percentage, not return on investment, which is of course important to justify these positions, to at least make that progress. But more important to me would be, are we meeting the necessary reduction in carbon footprint? And then the second part of the question is, if, as Kate from Concord said, I remember that the municipal energy utilization is 5% of the total town, or however it was worded, then 95% is residential or private businesses. And, there's a laundry list of things that I haven't heard anyone discuss. Reducing of commuter miles. How are we going to even address how many miles a year people drive with local transport? I mean, it's very different in the city versus out here. I hear a tree planting program, municipal. We're starting to at least talk about in Ashland about a no net loss of trees program at a minimum that would somehow extend to residents. I mean, we have a long way to go to implement something like that. I hear talk about the schools, and when I read about this stuff, I'm certainly not an expert, I read that the meat production industry, livestock, is maybe the the largest contributor to greenhouse gases. I'm going to promote, I'll finish this up, I'm going to promote the idea of perhaps choosing the school lunch program. We go in and teach the kids, and I hope that we do give them a good education. Composting and environmental sensitivity is all great, but maybe we should look at changing the school lunch program to not serve meats and start to teach a different way of eating that's more climate friendly. So anyway, those are my questions. You only have 1 minute left.
That's a big question for 1 minute, but I would say, my role was created with this goal of 80% reduction by 2050. And what that report tells us is that that is too far out and not fast enough, right? We also have a 25% reduction by 2020, which is, 8 months away. And I believe we'll meet that because we've decarbonized our electricity, because we did a greenhouse gas inventory, which basically tells us carbon footprint for the community, not just municipal, the whole community. And so we know that almost 40% of our emissions are from transportation, just cars driving around town. And the rest is mostly buildings. And it's about 30% residential buildings and 30% commercial buildings. And there's a sliver in there that's waste. And so what the greenhouse gas inventory helps us do is see where our emissions are coming from and where do we focus our efforts, particularly given the urgency of reducing a lot very quickly. And that's why we're doing a climate action plan, because you listed off a whole host of things, and we need to do all of those things all at once. And so that's where this climate action plan will help, because it will really lay out what are our priorities, what are the strategies, what's the potential emissions reduction from those strategies, and how do we begin implementing them and who's responsible for them, because it is such a big undertaking to be looking at these numbers and saying we need to reduce so much. We know that we reduced our emissions in our community 6% between 2008 and 2016, which is in the right direction, but it's not enough to meet our goals if we continue on at that pace.
So yeah, big question. I thought we only had a minute left, so I was just going to pick this up and say, we've got this, don't worry. Yeah. So, a term that certainly we use on a regular basis, but hasn't really passed into the common vernacular yet, is strategic electrification. You're going to be hearing the term strategic electrification more and more over time. And it's the idea that we're going to get to those reductions in carbon by making everything run off of electricity. And the reason that's important is that increasingly we are greening the electrical grid. Under state law right now, each year, electricity providers, the utilities, have to provide 1% more clean energy than the previous year. Starting in 2020, it's going to be 2% per year for 10 years, so we're actually going to be at 35% clean energy by 2030. I actually think that we're going to accelerate it even faster than that. It's actually, compared to a lot of other things we're trying to do, getting all of our electricity from clean sources is actually easier than many other things we're trying to do. So we can see a path forward actually to having all the electricity that we use coming from clean sources, carbon free. So what does that allow you to do? If you can convert all transportation to electric vehicles, you can then have carbon-free transportation. And it may seem hard to believe, but all of the experts that I listen to and read are saying we're about to see an explosion in electric vehicle adoption throughout society. Just the vehicles are getting better, they're getting cheaper. I drove here in a Chevy Bolt. It's the most fun car I've ever been in, certainly owned. And anyone who, I buy electric vehicles, for the town fleet, and we have these kind of curmudgeonly older guys who sort of think, scoff that this kind of glorified golf cart, as one of them called it, until he drove it and then absolutely fell in love and said he's going to get one for himself. So I think we're going to see an explosion in electric vehicle use. It's going to be kind of hockey stick shaped. And so that could take care of the roughly 40% of carbon emissions that comes from transportation in Massachusetts. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. I'm just saying there's a path forward there. The tough part is space heating in buildings, because you have all these buildings that were constructed to use oil and gas furnaces. And it's actually pretty difficult to retrofit those buildings. You can build net zero buildings at this point. It's technically feasible and not even that much more expensive. Sometimes it's not even more expensive than building a traditional home powered heated and cooled with fossil fuels. But for the existing building stock, it's turning out to be quite challenging to crack that nut. How are we going to convert those existing homes and buildings to electric heat? And that's where heat pumps come in. A couple of my colleagues mentioned that. That's one of the technologies we're promoting through the Heat Smart program that's in Arlington, combining with Winchester right now. And it is heat pumps. Many of you, if you don't know what a heat pump is, you've probably heard of a ductless mini split as a typical installation of a heat pump. It doesn't create heat, it just moves it from one place to another. It's essentially an air conditioner that can run backwards. And so not just cool a room, but also heat a room. And so increasingly, you're going to hear about heat pumps, both air source heat pumps and ground source heat pumps. They can heat and cool buildings using just electricity. And you can retrofit even an existing home to be fully heated with a heat pump. So that's, I think, the challenge. I don't know how we're going to get there in terms of space heating. That's the tough one. That's why we're doing Heat Smart in Arlington and Winchester, is to try to, get some experience, promote the technology, and start to figure out how we're going to get that done.
I just wanted to add, I know we don't have much time and we're over time, but if the IPCC report is right, and if everything that the climate scientists are saying is right, then this is going to happen in your community, and you're going to be taking these steps that Ken mentioned. The science proves that it's possible. I think that by having a sustainability coordinator, you're going to make it easier for your community, you're going to save your community money, and you're going to be an early adopter along the way. So you'll put your community in a better position, not only financially, but for your future if you take this step. So I hope that is an important message that you take away, that we're able to make it, we're not a panacea, and there's still a role for committees to play to be an advocate for the things that we as local government employees can't go out on a limb and get our select boards to do. But there's no loss that you have in hiring someone like us to do the job for you.
Once again, I'd like to thank our panel for taking the time to come and help us understand the opportunity that hiring a coordinator presents to our towns. Our town meetings are coming up, April 23rd for Sherborn and I believe May 6th for Holliston. Please come. We appreciate your support in supporting our article in each town. And on your chair is also a one-page summary. If you could share it with your family and friends, we'd appreciate it. And there's also a short survey on each chair. If you could take the time to fill it out, and there are pencils in the back of the room. We'd appreciate it and help us make events like this better. And finally, UCCA, Upper Charles Climate Action, meets on, I believe, the fourth Monday of every month at 7 o'clock at the Unitarian Universalist Church in Sherborn. We'd love to have you join us. Please come, win, and as often as you can. So thank you very much for coming on today.